Come on, you knew it was coming. Hello everyone, my name is Lemming and welcome to episode 2 of In Retrospect. As you may have guessed, this time I'll be covering Halo 2. Here we go again. As with Halo Combat Evolved, I first played Halo 2 at a friend's house. The same friend in fact. I was itching for more Halo. For me it was the best thing since sliced bread, and according to the sales figures, so did the rest of the world. 3 weeks before release, Halo 2 had garnered more than 1.5 million pre-orders, and post-release that number exploded to over 8 million, making it the best-selling first-generation console game. Xbox have reported that Halo and Halo 2 are still some of the most played Xbox games, and over 500 million online games were played before the server shut down in April 2010. But enough about statistics, it's time to dive back in. Coming straight from my playthrough of Halo CE gave me the advantage of still being in the right mindset to play a Halo game well. As before, I decided to go for a legendary difficulty, partly to keep it consistent across the two games and give a direct comparison, but the main reason was that I had never finished Halo 2 on legendary. In fact, it was the only one of the original trilogy I had never managed to beat on this difficulty. Cairo Station was both one of the hardest and most immersive missions I've played across the two Halo games. It was certainly a lot more combat intensive than any fight I had had before. The tight controls of Halo Combat Evolved had remained, but there were a few tweaks that had made them better. For one, the jumping mechanics feel a lot more reliable, and the movement overall slides less. In Halo 1 I would find myself falling off of objects because the Master Chief didn't stop moving when I released the W key. In Halo 2 this is gone. Another feature I had forgotten about but was glad for was the headshot indicator. Now there was no doubt when firing that you were going to hit where you wanted and not a pixel or two to the side. There were two main fights that I had trouble with on Cairo Station: the second hangar and the bomb room. The first was because I kept moving out of cover to try and gain a better position, but now that elites can dual wield plasma rifles they can mow you down in less than 2 seconds. I managed to overcome the enemy simply by being less greedy and taking my time. The second fight was made difficult because I had forgotten to pick up a better plasma pistol. Since the room has around 5 elites, you need that pistol to get through relatively unscathed. I ended up having to use a plasma rifle instead, and that's when I noticed one of the first major differences between weapons of the two games. In Halo 1, the plasma rifles were a lot more meaty and had a much slower overheat rate. Now I could barely take an elite's shields down before the gun needed to cool. There are quite a few differences between Halo 1 and 2 in terms of equipment and gameplay. For one thing, the health bar is gone and has been replaced with a much faster charging shield. This isn't an unwelcome change as it does increase your survivability slightly. The only problem is it's hard to tell how many hits you can take before going down after your shields are depleted. As for weapon changes, there are a lot. The pistol is a shell of its former self. The assault rifle has been replaced with the much more useful battle rifle. The shotgun has suffered a damage and reload speed drop off. The sniper rifle reloads faster and has a beautiful new scope, and there are a ton of new Covenant weapons to enjoy. The second mission sees you fighting on Earth, which is an interesting change from fighting your way across a Halo ring. It makes it feel like more is at stake. You may have the home field advantage, but humanity's greatest enemy has discovered your home. Playing through now I started to notice things I hadn't before. During the cutscene when all the warthogs are driving towards the city, they're all empty. It's not something you'd really notice, but now I can't unsee it. On a positive note though, I never noticed that the environments were partially destructible. This is impressive for a game that's getting on for 13 years old. Fighting your way through the streets of New Mombasa is pretty satisfying. The combat takes a shift to a more wave-based formula over the set enemies of Halo 1. This is fine though, as it makes the combat more intensive without completely overwhelming you. There was one thing that stopped me dead in my tracks over and over again: sniper jackals. It took a while for me to learn their spawn points so I could try and pick them off before they got into position. However, I had to resign myself to the fact that no matter how well I knew the area, no matter how quick a shot I was going to get zapped in the head by a jackal that arrived early. The worst part is that somewhere, at some time, someone in a boardroom said, "Yep, getting 180 no-scoped in the head from 50 miles away seems like a great mechanic to me." But alas, I made it through relatively unangered. Metropolis is an interesting mission as it has a nice mix of vehicle and on-foot sections. Driving through the tunnels is very challenging if you stop to fight everything, but it's actually more fun to try and evade them and just let the game's engine kill them when you emerge on the other side. The first set of tunnels was a little tedious, as the Marine was a terrible shot and an even worse driver. This was yet another Halo section that would have been great with a co-op partner, but unfortunately Halo 2 for Vista doesn't have a co-op option. Exiting the tunnels put a smile on my face, as Sergeant Johnson delivered once more in exactly the same way. Crossing the bridge in the tank was immense fun. 2 of the Marines that came along for the ride have rocket launchers, so any enemy vehicles you see are immediately annihilated. As soon as you get out of the tank, the game went back to its somewhat difficult but not too bad level of gameplay. You have a small section of tunnel to get through, followed by another short vehicle section. The area just outside the last tunnel was filled with more sniper jackals, but the Gauss Warthog soon took care of them. I entrusted my life to a random Marine and let him drive me around while I dealt with the enemies. The final vehicle area saw 2 Wraith tanks trying to stop me, but again the Gauss Warthog delivered. The only thing left to destroy was the Scarab tank, and that was where the game really began to shine. Dropping onto the Scarab was a little daunting, as there was a platoon of enemies waiting for me on the outer platform. Once I entered the tank, I began to have flashbacks to the Truth and Reconciliation from Halo 1. This wasn't a bad thing, the muscle memory kicked in and I managed to clear the inner tank on my 3rd attempt. When the Master Chief stepped out with the Scarab exploding behind him, I realised the theme of Halo 2 had shifted from Combat Evolved. No longer were you a loner trying to survive, now you were a hero, kicking ass and taking names.
That's right, you mothers! Run!
The Arbiter was a mission I hadn't been looking forward to. I remembered not liking these missions when I was younger, but I couldn't remember why. Now I think it was just because I didn't like to play as anyone but the Master Chief. The mission is partially stealth-based, however this is made difficult when your active camera only lasts for 5 seconds. I ended up using the ability more to escape fights than enter areas stealthily. Most of the mission went fairly smoothly. There were only 2 areas that gave me trouble. The Long Banshee section was difficult until I realised the Phantom accompanying you is completely invincible. Why do it yourself if something much stronger than you can do it for you? Once the Flood were revealed, the game showed another major change between itself and Combat Evolved. The Flood were actually a viable threat now. In Halo 1, the best way to deal with infection forms was to stand still and let your shield pop them. Do that in Halo 2 and you will die. Combat forms are now much better at using weapons, and pack a hell of a punch if they get up close. I used the tactic of hitting them with the carbine from range and using the energy sword up close. The final part of the mission was a boss fight, which is an odd change of pace but a welcome one. This was also the other section that gave me trouble. Fighting out in the open is a complete no-go. Facing an elite with dual-wielding plasma rifles is a death sentence. In this fight you have to face up to 4 of them looking at you. I ended up hiding in a side tunnel and forcing the heretic leader to come to me. When I finally killed him, it was with a glorious throw of a sticky grenade, and after a short cutscene I was thrown back into the fray with the Master Chief. You're dropped, literally, into this mission with an SMG and a rocket launcher. Thankfully there is an ODST nearby with a battle rifle so you can give him the useless weapon and take the real one for yourself. Getting to the first checkpoint basically consisted of learning where the turret emplacements were, then using a rocket launcher to lock on and take them out. After that there was a short fight to the temple and a fairly long hold as wave after wave of Covenant dropped in while I waited for reinforcements. It took a few attempts but was still a fairly easy section. After this I had to reactivate a bridge that had been locked down by the Covenant. This was a pain in the ass. I had been gifted a Warthog, but the Marines who came along with it were next to useless. If I mounted the turret, they would do their best to drive me into the line of fire. If I took the driver's seat, their shooting was on par with a blind toddler. I ended up just letting them do their own thing, while I tried to take the ridiculous amount of ghost elites out from afar. This proved to be the winning strategy. After reactivating the bridge, you're given another tank to drive, and this is where the cracks started to show. Whilst the vehicle controls had been updated and hugely improved, the mechanics of the game had been changed so much that they were no longer balanced. When fighting other vehicles, you're much better off using the secondary machine gun, as the main cannon doesn't pack the same punch as it used to, and while you can now move and shoot in different directions, the tank just doesn't have the sustainability for the long fights you get put through. A little further on you're back on foot, and it's another area with an overwhelming amount of sniper jackals. At this point they were comparable to cigarettes. They usually come in packs of 10 to 20, and it doesn't matter how many of the little bastards you smoke, they'll kill you eventually. The best tactic is to hide and try and peek them one at a time, but this isn't guaranteed to work. The submerged section of the temple offered up some new and interesting challenges. It introduced Honor Guard elites, and while they went down in much the same way as regular ones, they were far more efficient at finding and killing you. There was one room that gave me some trouble, and it was caused by my second most hated enemy, Needler Buggets. These guys are nightmare fuel. They can easily swarm you, and the Needler can be a difficult weapon to deal with at the best of times. Despite their size, they take 3 or 4 battle rifle bursts to take down, making them a much larger threat than grunts or even shielded jackals. Hunters at least were still pretty easy to kill. Killing the Prophet of Regret was the second boss fight in the game, and it was much easier than the Heretic Leader. The room had a number of Honor Guard elites and a whole mess of grunts, but once they were dealt with, the Prophet was a cakewalk. Simply run forward as he fires his beam, jump, hold E, then mash F till he teleports away. Rinse and repeat until your Prophet is dead. The concluding cutscene to this mission is a nice one, as it dangles the bait of mystery in front of the player, then snatches it away to switch you back to the shoes of the Arbiter.
This is not your grave, but you are welcome in it.
Before I continue, I want to say that Bungie really missed a trick with the Arbiter sections. Rather than facing other Covenant forces and a ton of Flood, there should have been at least one mission fighting against humans. It would have actually given you something to think about, and forced a true perspective shift rather than a purely cosmetic one. Anyway, Sacred Icon is a return to the repetitive nature of the library, only with twice as much faff. After the first few rooms, I actually found it much easier to just run for it, and I imagine I cut down the mission time by about an hour. Once you cross over the first gondola, you're thrown into a really difficult fight, and this is where I started seeing Halo 2 devolve into the same old patterns that other games use when they ramp up the difficulty. Whereas in Combat Evolved I said I never felt cheated, the same can't be said for Halo 2. There were so many occasions where I would clear out a room of Flood only to have the last one ping me from 30 feet away with a shotgun, downing me instantly. There are 2 major holdouts in this mission. The first was outdoors at an elite camp, and you had to wait for your elite commander, I'm going to call him Elite Johnson, to show up, and the second was on another gondola. The first was okay, it was tough, but the most annoying thing were the allies it drops with you. Elites can be really hard to take down, especially in groups of 4 or more. However, as soon as they're on your side, they go down like a porn star in heat. This leads me into another major complaint about Halo 2. The weapons and equipment you have are far more effective in the hands of the enemy. It's completely unreasonable and illogical to say that a gun does X damage when I use it, but 2.5x when an enemy uses it. Moving on to the second holdout, it was a much tougher fight, mostly because of checkpointing. Checkpointing in Halo 1 had purpose and was nicely spaced so that you had some breathing time between fights. In Halo 2 you might as well roll some dice to see whether you're going to get a checkpoint. On the second gondola especially, after finishing the fight 4 or 5 times I'd be killed by a random Flood and have to do the whole fight again. That's fine, but don't make me sit and watch 2.5 minutes of gondola riding every goddamn time I die. Eventually, a checkpoint pinged halfway through the fight, meaning if I died I was in combat when I respawned. Frustrating is not a strong enough word. The cutscene going into the next mission showed another change compared to the previous game. Halo 2 was far more focused on story. The cutscenes are a lot longer and more frequent, but they are still relevant to what's going on. There are very few, if any, instances where a section of cutscene could be cut and you'd still know what was going on. Most of the story is still told during missions though, and a good indicator of the difficulty of a section is how well you know the story of that section. To say 2 betrayals drops you in Shit Creek without a paddle now seems harsh, because the opening to Inside Job throws you in the creek and holds you under until the bubbles stop. I died again and again and again and again and again. I died 13 times in 5 minutes before I hit the next checkpoint. This angered me beyond belief and I was ready to throw in the towel, but being so close to the end I couldn't give up. This encounter was another wave-based room and it took a long time to finish. There were 6 waves in total, but there was so little cover in the room it was difficult not to corner myself. Thankfully the Needlers had finally come into their own, even if only for a short time. While it was tough to get all of the shots to hit a brute, it only took around 30 to kill one. The room with the Marines was by far the easiest in this mission. The level's verticality set up a lot of opportunities to force the enemy to funnel themselves into your sights. The rooms and corridors containing buggets were far more challenging. They wouldn't spawn until you got past all the cover, so it was 50-50 whether you'd make it back to a safe spot to take them out. This became a lot easier once the brutes and elites started fighting each other, as the AI is far more adept at hitting erratically moving targets. One room in particular brings me back to an earlier complaint about weapon power. When the elites and brutes are fighting each other, you can see that their weapons do far more damage as the enemies go down much quicker if you just leave them to fight each other. As I moved further through the ship I was reintroduced to my favourite enemy type, Sniper Jackals. Seriously, fuck these guys. There is nothing more demoralising than being super sneaky and careful, only to hear that out of fucking nowhere and having to do the whole section again. Sorry about that. The final fight of this mission is a tough one, but you have a nice track from Breaking Benjamin to keep you motivated. After the fight is finally over, a few more elites pour out the door you need to go through, but they can be taken out with the old wombo combo. Personally, I don't like that the main character has to share screen time with the Arbiter. I can understand why it was done, but the differences between the two are so minor that they may as well not exist. There was a pattern that had made itself obvious over the last few missions. Yet again you're dropped into a combat zone with very few options other than fighting your way through. With brutes now being the main enemy type, each encounter was much harder than before. I found myself relying on my active camo to get to a position of relative safety before trying to engage them. It doesn't help that the weapons you're given at the beginning are completely useless against brutes. The energy sword does kill them fairly quickly as long as you hit them in the back and they aren't berserking. The first 30 metres or so took about 7 attempts, but I eventually made it to the first internal fight. This one was a little easier, but still not to a point where it was doable on the first or even second try. Berserking brutes were probably the main stopper in the last few missions. Unless you have a carbine, they will shrug off most damage you throw at them. Fight Club was probably the most difficult section of this mission. The beginning sees you against no less than 4 Sniper Jackals, 2 of which are hidden around a corner and will only pop out when you least expect it. Once you've dealt with the initial group of brutes and jackals, there are a few waves to deal with. The first one took a long time to get right, and the appearance of yet another sniper didn't help. I tried a few different weapon combinations to deal with the brutes and eventually got through with a beam rifle and shotgun. Jumping back to the Master Chief for the last time saw me fighting my way through High Charity, only this time it was infested with flood. The darkened corridors made it difficult to navigate during a firefight, and the AI's infinite knowledge of every room meant you really had to watch your back. This did make fights interesting, however it also made them extremely frustrating. You could clear a room, move on to the next, and then get instantly killed because you missed a single flood form that had hidden and waited for you to pass. Once more, with feeling, again drops you in the middle of a fight with no cover. This was getting a little old now, and I was feeling less inclined to complete battles. I was no longer having fun and just wanted to get the game over and done with. Halo 1 gave you fights that were hard to win, but it always wanted you to be victorious. Halo 2 on the other hand seems to want to kick you while you're down. It wants you to lose. There is a modern comparison I can make between this and the Dark Souls series. While the first game was always willing you to keep going and never give up, the second made it clear from the start that you cannot win this. You will die over and over again, and in the end it won't matter. The ultimate mission in the game sees you once again playing as the Arbiter. The chief story is done, and what an anticlimactic ending he had. This is another level with a split in vehicle and on-foot combat, the only difference is that it's not as interesting as it was before. Freeing the elites was one of the better fights in this mission, as you can either try to stealthily take out the brutes, or you can go for the tactic I did and just peek them to death. After you get back outside, there is a short fight before Johnson asks you for an escort while driving his unkillable death machine. I did try a few times to help him out, but your Banshee is so weak compared to the enemies that I just couldn't be arsed anymore. I skipped as many encounters as I could, including the brutes just before facing Tartarus. The closing minutes of Halo 2 just hadn't gripped me the same way Combat Evolved did. The game had shrunk down from a smart shooter into a bunch of rooms with waves of enemies and a boss at the end of it. What I had loved about Halo 1 was gone. Every boss aside from the heretic leader had unending minions coming to the aid of them, and periods of invincibility where you could do nothing but wait for them to be vulnerable again. In short, the game had strayed away from innovation and degraded to the mainstream. It may seem like I've been ragging on Halo 2 a lot for not being as good as the first, and while this is true, I did still enjoy the experience. Even if the ending was definite sequel bait, the story was still good enough to keep me engaged for the 15 hours or so it took to finish. Now it's time to look at what put Halo 2 on the map. Multiplayer. I spent days playing Halo 2 in my youth, whether online or in LAN. I would play every weekend. Being able to make your own game modes was incredible and added a huge amount of variety to keep the game interesting. The more popular game modes, such as SWAT and Free-for-all Fiesta, would be adapted by other players and passed on until they expanded into the community as a whole. To keep the video consistent, I can only comment on the state of the multiplayer as it is today. Thankfully, a group named Project Cartographer is keeping the community alive with their multiplayer mod. Project Cartographer replaces your LAN option with private servers that run 24/7. You can also host your own games for others to play, so long as your connection is good enough. It can be tough to find a good game, as a lot of players will drop in and out as they please, and some just aren't very good at taking a quick and heavy loss. However, once a group gets going, you can have hours of fun. Halo 2 is very much skill-based, meaning that all players have access to the same equipment and resources from the off. This in turn means that the only way to kill another player is to be better than them. You can't just pick up a stronger weapon and get lucky to win a game. SWAT remains my favourite game mode. It's fast-paced and requires good accuracy to win. You can't be too choosy with what game mode you play if you want to jump right in, as the player base is still fairly small. Another drawback is that most of the servers are hosted in South America, meaning that communication is nigh on impossible for purely English speakers like myself. Overall, Halo 2 is still a great game, but I remember it being much better than it actually is. This is mostly due to my great experience with multiplayer, and to be fair, the multiplayer still holds up incredibly well, even to the point where it has become a game I regularly go back to between games of Counter-Strike and Pokemon. The story of Halo 2, however, just feels like a placeholder. It's warming the seat for Halo 3, and it knew it from the beginning. Kind of. Halo 2 and 3 were meant to be the same game, meaning Halo 2's cliffhanger ending wasn't the original plan. As with Halo 1, Bungie were pushed for time with a deadline and had to scrap around 50% of the final game to make the shipping date. This included building the game's engine from scratch during the 12-month release delay and scrapping the online multiplayer they'd spent so long building. The question arises, what would Halo 2 have been if its development wasn't so chaotic? Chris Butcher of Bungie said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "If we had had all the time in the world, the game would never have been finished. We would have scrapped 20 versions and never shipped a single one. We are, and always have been, our own worst critics." Bungie went through hell to get this game ready for the Xbox's last Christmas, and what they sent out was a top-notch product. It easily makes my top 10 games of all time, but it misses the top spot due to its glaring faults. Whether or not Halo 2 is the game everyone makes it out to be is up to the individual. Personally, Halo 2 is very important to me. It created memories that will last forever, and forged a path in my life that would follow for years to come.